Hello. In the round 2 of Group C, we had a match between Vincent Keymer and Vidit Gujarati. Keymer was once again white, and he tried with d4. Against Dubov he played d4 as well. Vidit answered with knight f6. We had c4, e6, knight f3, d5. We had a queen's gambit, but after knight c3, Vidit doesn't go for bishop e7 for the classical variation, he went for c5. And now we have invitation to the Tarrasch defense. White took on d5. If black takes with the pawn on d5, that's a classical Tarrasch defense. If he takes with the knight, that's a semi-Tarrasch. After e4, black takes, and after this we have a completely different type of position. But here Vidit chose to capture on d4, after which queen takes, and now e d5 by black. There's also a very old line capturing on d5 with the knight, but it came out of fashion. It doesn't get played on the top level anymore. There was a game from 1997 between Anand and Adams, which continued with e4, knight c6, bishop b5, and after capturing, queen takes, bishop d7, and castling, white had a slight edge because of the spatial advantage he got. And in general, this variation is not so popular anymore. It's not played on the top level as before. These days, on the top level, e d5 is the only move. And now Keymer chose to enter the endgame after e4. And here, Vidit took on e4. Also, it's possible to go for knight c6 to attack the queen. And now, if the queen moves, then there is always an option of even going d4. That's why white wants to pin the knight by bishop b5. If black takes now on e4, then he enters a position in which he has a very, very bad pawn structure. This was the game between Grishchuk and So from the Moscow Grand Prix, I think. After knight g5, bishop e6 was played, and after this taking on c6, you see how bad are these pawns. And after king e2, Grishchuk had a slight edge, which he managed to convert. So these days, either the way So played, with knight c6, bishop b5, d4, or like Vidit played with d4. The same issues with the structure appear. After queen takes, king takes, knight g5. Now if black goes king e7 or king e8, there is bishop c4, and he'll attack on f7 and get back the pawn, also keeping this e4 pawn quite weak. So bishop e6 was the better move, but now he's doubling his pawns. After knight e6, f e6, and going bishop g5, trying to capture on e4. Knight c6. White doesn't rush with the capture on e4, because after bishop b4, the knight has to go back to c3, because if you do king e2, it's clumsy, because the bishop on f1 stays stuck. Knight has to go to c3 or d2, let's say c3, and after king e7, white is slightly better due to better structure and bishop pair, but after king f7, black might get some counterplay with knight g4 or just exchanging these rooks. So he plays first bishop c4 to force the king to get to e7, to block the bishop. And now he captures, not allowing bishop b4. That's a really, really nice difference between the two lines. But now Vidit just manages to get the king to f7. Now white takes on f6, takes and castles. He wants to go rook d7 next to capture on b7, so that's why Vidit goes rook d8. And now white captures on d8, captures and goes rook d1, which forces black to go bishop e7. If he went for king e7, there is unpleasant knight c5, followed by rook d7 next, which wouldn't help black at all. Let's say if you go b6, there is always rook d7, and after this, bishop b5 is so strong. And what can black do? Black's king is pinned on e8, rook h7 is going to happen next, capturing the rook on h8, so that's no solution for this problem, and that's why Vidit plays bishop e7 here. He allows rook d7, which Keymer did. He played this. White plays f5, tries to get his king to f6 and somehow to activate his other pieces. Now Keymer gave a check on d6, king f6, and now he took a pawn. Vidit consciously sacrificed the pawn, but he knew that he has enough counterplay for this pawn. He took on b7, rook b7, bishop c5, defending the pawn on a7 and also attacking the pawn on f2. And now if Keymer defends the pawn by f3, there is rook d8, followed by bishop e3. And then rook d2, the rook is going to be very active and black will get a decent counterplay. So that's why white doesn't bother with defending the pawn. He goes for rook c7 here. Black takes on f2 because why not? And now rook c6 by white. He tries to make black passive and to push his queenside pawns. Now Vidit defends by rook e8. And now b4, like I said, he wants to create a passed pawn. Bishop g1 by black. Now white isn't so cool to leave the h2 pawn hanging. He plays h3. And now Vidit finds a really nice defensive resource here. He doesn't want to stay passive with the rook on e8. He uses the fact that b4 is played, the b4 pawn is loose now, and he plays rook b8. Now if white reacts by pushing b5, there is rook b6, and he would be able to hold this. After rook goes to c8, there's rook d6, and black gets very good counterplay with this e-passed pawn. White plays the second most logical move in the position, besides a3. It's rook e6, just capture the pawn with the check, why not? King escapes, and now the b4 pawn is under attack. If you defend it by a3, there is rook c8. Very unpleasant move, which loses the bishop for white. So what to do? You have to defend the pawn, and you have to avoid rook c8, losing the bishop. So white plays b5, and after Vidit goes rook c8, we have rook c6. But that was the whole idea of Vidit, to exchange rooks in this opposite color bishop position. Because now after exchanging, he can blockade the pawn on c6 and have a drawn endgame. He just has to put all his pawns on the king side on the dark squares, and he will be just fine. He's going to block the c-pawn with the bishop and also with the king if white's king gets too close to the queen side, let's say to b7. White tries now with king d2, and now black is realizing the step 1 of his plan. He wants to put all his pawns on the dark squares. After bishop d4, he goes h6 first, and after king e2, f4. The bishop on d3 cannot use them as a target. King f3, bishop c7, king e4, a5. Now, if it stays on a7, it might become a bit tricky because when the king gets to b7, it would attack both bishop on c7 and the pawn on a7, which you don't really want. You want to keep the bishop on c7, defending all the pawns it can defend. Now bishop c4 by white, and they shuffle a bit. They just play some moves, and after bishop c7, they agreed to a draw because there's no way for white to break through here. If he tries king b5, there is just king e6, and in case of this, king e5, king here, king d6. The bishop can just shuffle on d8, c7. So that's it. This is a really clean draw. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. See you soon and have a nice day. Bye.